So, in part one of this two-part video series, you heard our young friend from Hong Kong, whom we're calling Han, express in his own words his journey in his exploration of Buddhism, beginning with his focus on the Diamond Sutra and evolving toward the Shurangama Sutra. He noted in that video a special affinity for the concept of Tathagatagarbha, and subsequent to sending me that audio clip that was the basis for the video, he wrote an essay describing his understanding of this wonderful Mahayana concept. The following is what he wrote. To understand the concept of Tathagatagarbha, that is, Buddha nature, is very important. The main concept in the Bodhisattva vehicle within Mahayana Buddhism is that all dharmas are marked with emptiness. They are not produced or stopped. This is referred to by the term sunyata, but this is not the same as empty or voidness. In fact, there does exist something which cannot be described by language and speech. That is referred to as Tathagatagarbha. To establish a correct view of Tathagatagarbha, we have to recognize that the capacity of our eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and body are limited. Specifically, these abilities are limited in some areas. When the capacity is exceeded in those areas, these sensors are pretty useless. The sixth consciousness, which is mental consciousness, is called manovijnana. It is based on the functions of the sensors. When a person is trying to remember the past, the sensors performed in the past help shape the memories that he or she is recalling. However, these sensors themselves cannot see, hear, or reach luminous mind, Buddha nature, or sunyata. When we use our human eyes to observe a thing, we think it is in stillness. But Buddhism teaches us that instead of stillness, it is actually in constant motion at an astonishingly quick speed. Even physics has taught the same thing in our science lessons. For example, we think of a table as a complete piece of carved wood without any spaces or gaps. But in the Abhidharma Kosakarika, or verses on the treasury of Abhidharma, we are told that all matter is made of atoms, and that there are gaps between each atom. As taught in science, each atom is not connected with other atoms. They are not stuck together. Gaps exist between them. It is just like when we observe the Milky Way. It appears as a white light painted on the sky. But through the help of telescopes we know that in fact it consists of numerous stars separated by light years. In such examples, with regard to our eyes, if a thing becomes too small or too large, we cannot perceive the whole reality. Our eyes constantly fail us. So thus, the capacity of our eyes is limited. Since our sensors are so weak, it is impossible to observe sunyata. Consequently, one who believes in his or her sensors as a basis for perceiving ultimate reality is a fool. If the Tathagatagarbha truly exists, why can't we pinpoint it by using expressible languages? Since language and speech can only transmit things that are sensed by our sensors, we cannot use language to express things that we cannot see, hear, or fathom. And since we cannot, this becomes inexpressible. For example, in Pure Land Buddhism, we know that the Sukhavati world of Amitabha Buddha is made up of beautiful gems and lapis lazuli. But how truly beautiful and serene is such a Buddha land? We have no idea. But what we do is borrow something we know from our conceptual understanding. People are probably thinking, maybe Sukhavati's gems are like the gems in the jewelry stores. Likewise, Tathagatagarbha does not belong to the fields of our sensors. Since it is not possible to be seen by eyes or heard by ears, we cannot truly fathom it. There are no ways to fully express it. If that is the case, how are the descriptions of Tathagatagarbha to be transmitted? In order to solve this issue, there is a famous parable from Buddhism. Someone asks, "What is a moon?" Another person uses a finger and points toward the direction of the moon in the sky and answers, "There is the moon." If the one who is asking looks at the finger, which represents the teaching, then he or she does not see the moon. This moon pointing is an educative method to inform people who want to see the moon, to the effect that any teaching using language is provisional and cannot fully capture the true nature of an existence such as Tathagatagarbha. That said, through the guidance of teaching based upon language and speech, we can approach an understanding of things that are inexpressible step by step, and in that way verify the veracity of the teaching through our own experience. This is why in Buddhism, Shakyamuni Buddha was such a great educator. The so-called science that we learn in schools and universities in this physical world can be understood and felt by our sensors. But in order for us worldly humans to understand something we can't see or feel, realms that cannot be transmitted by words and figures, is indeed a difficult task. But in Buddhism, there are techniques to do just that. First, we have to overthrow all the views and concepts that we have learned and understood. After that, there are no views, no dharmas, no concepts. So it is. Myriad dharmas do not depart from Tathagatagarbha, or Buddha nature. When we are born as a human, we continue to exist as an entity which consists of body and mind. In the process, we establish a lot of views, such as upwards, downwards, correction, inversion. Tathagatagarbha is like a state wherein we enter space, since it has zero gravity. We suddenly find out all these definitions of upwards and downwards disappear. Likewise, if we wipe out all such relative views, we are starting to enter the realm of Tathagatagarbha, or luminous mind. The fundamental nature of our mind is like that, and since time without beginning, it never departs us. The distance is so close, yet we do not discover it. Once we discover it, this is called initial realization. In a 24-hour period, except for the hours we are in deep sleep, during which we are not dreaming, our minds are constantly creating thoughts, which by definition express extremes and are dualistic. But in fact, every thought stems from Tathagatagarbha and maintains based upon Tathagatagarbha and disappears into Tathagatagarbha. In Ratnagal Travibhagha, the compendium of Tathagatagarbha literature, it is taught that the mind is like a universe. The universe is produced from empty voidness. It exists in this empty voidness. Then it will vanish into this empty voidness. The dynamics of our thoughts are similar. Every thought emerges from the Dharma Dhatu, maintains based upon the Dharma Dhatu, and disappears into the Dharma Dhatu. Numerous Buddhist practitioners have verified this. In each moment of thought, speaking from the perspective of a commoner, there is a relative difference, and it is dualistic. But from a practitioner point of view, at least from those who have obtained certain degrees of enlightenment, every thought is Tathagatagarbha. The Buddha nature pervades everywhere. And speaking from the reality described by the Buddha Dharma, all dharmas are fundamentally without a difference. The so-called difference is simply created by our attachment and clinging minds. All forms and matter are in constant change and retransformation. What never changes is the Tathagatagarbha, which is our fundamental nature, our self-nature. Once we realize this and are able to enter into it, we attain enlightenment and can become Buddha instantly. If unable to enter it, we are stuck in samsara. An ancient scripture called the Treatise of Enlightenment of Nature, written by Bodhidharma, states, "Sentient beings and Bodhi are like ice and water. Water freezes to become ice, while the ice melts into water. Fundamentally, They are of no difference. They are both H2O. If the temperature is higher than 0 degrees centigrade, only liquid water exists, but not the ice, and vice versa. Due to the variation in temperature, it manifests either into water or into ice. Likewise, the minds of sentient beings and Buddhas are all Tathagatagarbha. When minds are covered by ignorance, it manifests into sentient beings with affliction. And because some have stayed away from the corruption of ignorance, they are called Buddhas. Within the realms experienced by the Buddhas, the disruption caused by ignorance and afflictions do not exist in their mind. While sentient beings are suffering from afflictions and unable to understand their own mind, they are nonetheless the same as the Buddhas. So it is fundamentally that both sentient beings and Buddhas are the same. All of them are Buddhas. In the Treatise of the Blood and Vessels, written by Bodhidharma, it mentions a theory to the effect that if one sees his own nature, one is a Buddha. If one never sees his nature, he is a sentient being. Of course, if one's cultivation and practices are not good enough, he or she doesn't have sufficient knowledge and power to maintain such thoughts in his or her mind. He or she will lose the realms experienced by the Buddhas. But through careful cultivation, one can reach a realm where Buddhas and sentient beings are non-dual. No difference, a realm that never separates both. Then they become Buddhas. All sentient beings are equal. Such a profound realm can only be experienced by skillful and experienced practitioners. But because we don't experience it, doesn't mean we do not recognize it as such. In many Buddhist sutras, it says, all life has Tathagatagarbha, even small animals such as an earthworm or a cockroach. They have Tathagatagarbha. Buddhists do not believe that humans are born with wickedness. Instead, you can say that they are born with goodness. However, that goodness does not equate with the concept of goodness in our common understandings of the term. It is profoundly pure and clean, free of afflictions. So from this viewpoint, we can say a person embodies goodness. The problem is that we hold a notion of a self. If we can abandon our clinging mind, we will discover that the fundamental nature of our mind corresponds to sunyata, which is free from corruption. In the light of Buddha Dharma, all lives are equal. They are the same. All minds of all sentient beings are, in fact, not different. Just like from the same gold ore, one can mold it into rings and some other kinds of jewelry, you see that they have different shapes, but their fundamental nature is still gold. As it is, sentient beings inside the 6 transmigratory realms have different personalities and dispositions, but fundamentally the nature of their minds are not different. The reasons for the various different manifestations are due to whether they have obtained realization or not. So the difference between Buddhas and sentient beings is due to the difference between realization and ignorance. To summarize, I quote this paragraph from the Platform Sutra. He preached the Diamond Sutra for me. When he reached the words, responding to the non-abiding, yet generating the mind, I experienced a great enlightenment, realizing that all the myriad dharmas do not transcend their self-natures. I thereupon informed the Patriarch of this, saying, no matter when, the self-natures are fundamentally and naturally pure. No matter when, the self-natures are fundamentally neither generated nor extinguished. No matter when, the self-natures are fundamentally and naturally sufficient unto themselves. No matter when, the self-natures are fundamentally without movement. No matter when, the self-natures are able to generate the myriad dharmas.